Good morning, afternoon, and evening, fellow corporeals. Time is of no importance here. Welcome to the sessions, a time of entertainment, a time of learning, a time of thrills. The time has come for us to put aside our creature comforts and embrace those feelings of great excitement and pleasure by passing through that base emotion, the emotion of fear. You can enter the sessions, but will you ever come back as yourself? Or will something sinister and menacing follow you out of these sessions? To keep the evil at bay, stalk the nerdporeal lifeform and slay that red subscribe button and the bell to follow and obsess over future videos, streams, and insightful commentary. Remember, it is the unknown, the unseen, and the unhinged that preys upon all of us in the darkness. But perhaps mankind will one day learn to supply its own light. Make yourselves comfortable, find a nice place to perch, and make sure you have a tasty beverage or perhaps some food, because what you are about to go through may change the very fabric of your reality. Make you question things that you would not normally question, and ponder if you ever will make it through the sessions, the serial horror sessions. Mythology has been a staple of human civilization for thousands of years. It has brought to all cultures of the earth the genesis of mankind, the one God, or the gods of Olympus, Valhalla, and incorporeal beings of various sizes, shapes, and abilities. These ideas inspired stories and characters that have withstood the test of time. However, there was one figure from mythology over the course of many generations that was used to instill fear into children to behave, a boogeyman of sorts. This creature could take any form, including that of a mental patient who has nothing left, no emotion, no reason, the blackest of eyes perhaps, the embodiment of evil itself. Perhaps a movie producer had an idea for a movie about a serial killer stalking babysitters, who then hires an up-and-coming director and his producer girlfriend to write it and perhaps implement the boogeyman idea on the last day of October, also known as Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, the night he came home. Halloween begins in the town of Haddonfield, Illinois on Halloween night in 1963. We are in a point of view shot of a person approaching a house. The person, a voyeur, peers in the house and sees a girl and her boyfriend screwing around and then go upstairs. The voyeur looks up at the girl's bedroom to see the lights turn off, setting something inside it off. The voyeur sneaks into the back of the house and picks up a butcher knife in the kitchen. The boyfriend leaves, giving the person a chance to sneak upstairs, don a clown mask, and walk into the girl's bedroom. The girl recognizes and yells at the person in the mask, but she is repeatedly stabbed shortly thereafter. The person goes back down the stairs and walks out of the front door as the mom and dad come home. We learn that the person in the mask's name is Michael Myers, and as the parents rip off the clown mask, we find out the killer is a young child and that the victim was his older sister, Judith Myers. We jump ahead 15 years, and it is now October 30th of 1978. We meet Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance, who has been Michael's psychiatrist and doctor for the entire 15 years. Loomis and his assistant, Marion Chambers, are on their way to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, 3 hours from Haddonfield, where Michael Myers has been kept for the time since his sister's murder. They're going there to pick him up and escort Michael to a hearing where Loomis is hoping that Michael will never get released. However, as they approach the sanitarium, there are a bunch of inmates wandering around the campus. Loomis goes to the gate and tries to call the main office. But an inmate, whose face we never see, jumps on top of the government car and attacks Chambers and scares her out of the vehicle, hence stealing the car, despite never having learned how to drive. We learn that this is Michael, and also learn how Loomis views Myers by saying this telling line.
He's gone from here. The evil is gone.
We skip to the next day, October 31st, 1978, a Halloween, 15 years after the Myers incident. We meet young Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, as she is tasked with dropping off the keys to the Myers house, that same house in the beginning of the movie. She walks and runs into young Tommy Doyle, who she will be babysitting that evening. We learn Haddonfield is the one place in Illinois that has an actual palm tree in it. Tommy warns Laurie not to walk up to the Myers house because it is haunted, due to the awful stuff happening there once. She goes and drops the keys off anyways on the stoop and leaves, but as she leaves, a figure walks out of the house and watches her as she is walking away. This figure has found its prey. Back in Smith's Grove, Loomis is seen arguing with the head of the sanitarium, Dr. Wynn, on Michael Myers. We learn Loomis warned the staff about Myers and his evil intentions, but nobody believed him because Myers for the past 15 years was mute, motionless, and did not express any emotions whatsoever. Loomis takes it upon himself to travel to Haddonfield to warn the inhabitants of Myers and what he is capable of. At the first stop, Loomis attempts to call the Haddonfield Police Department to no avail, but we see Myers' sheets on the ground. As the audience finds out, Michael has already killed and has taken the victim's coveralls. Back in Haddonfield, a mysterious figure whose face we never see is continually stalking Laurie and even Tommy as they are at school. We meet Laurie's friends, Linda, who continually says "totally" after every sentence, and the snarky Annie, who are both, unlike Laurie, pretty oblivious to the figure of a man stalking them as they are walking home from driving on the same street, to walking behind a bush. As Laurie gets home and walks in her bedroom, she sees that same figure of a man still watching her from her neighbor's yard next to the laundry line. Loomis arrives in Haddonfield and first visits the cemetery that Judith Myers is buried in. The undertaker tells Loomis a grisly story about a father that just gets up after dinner and murders his family with a hacksaw. They get to the plot location but find Judith Myers' headstone missing. Loomis realizes that Michael has indeed come home. Laurie gets picked up by Annie on their way to their babysitting gigs, with Laurie babysitting Tommy Doyle and Annie is babysitting the Wallace's daughter, Lindsay. Listening to Don't Fear the Reaper while smoking some dope, the girls run into Annie's father, Sheriff Brackett, and we find out a hardware store was recently broken into with a mask and a couple of knives missing. The girls leave, and we see Dr. Loomis is also there and walks up and introduces himself to the sheriff. When Loomis's head is turned, we see the government car slip right past him, following the girls to their respective gigs. After the girls are settled in, Evil emerges from the government vehicle and begins to stalk Annie at the Wallaces. Loomis and Sheriff Brackett go over to the Myers house, where they believe Myers will turn up again. We learn that off-screen there is a dead dog in the house that Myers fed on, and also that Loomis has a gun after reacting to a jump scare. We learn about his history with Myers, and that as a child, there was nothing left, no reason, no understanding of good or evil, right or wrong. He was a 6-year-old child with a blank, pale, emotionless face, but with the blackest of eyes. The devil's eyes. Loomis tried the first 8 years to get through to him, and spent the last 7 trying to keep him locked up because what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. Loomis suggests to the sheriff to keep a lookout but not to inform the media to prevent mistaken identity and hysteria. He believes Michael will come back, since he was already at the house earlier, so Loomis decides to wait for him, while the sheriff and his men patrol the town. Back at the Doyles, Laurie is on the phone with Annie, and a bored Tommy peers outside and sees a dark figure standing outside the Wallaces, a shape of sorts. Believing it is the boogeyman, Tommy shows Laurie, but the figure has disappeared. Meanwhile, at the Wallaces, Chester, the family's German shepherd, knows that there is a lurker near the house and starts barking. Annie lets him out, and the dog confronts the shape. But let's just say the dog doesn't get out of that confrontation alive. The audience is shown not to take the shape lightly, that perhaps Loomis may be right about him. In a slightly more gratuitous scene than usual, Annie spills butter on her clothes and strips off her clothes literally in the middle of the kitchen for the shape to watch. The shape reacts and knocks a hanging potted plant off and withdraws out of sight of the viewer. Annie walks out to the laundry house to wash her clothes, with the shape continuing to stalk her from right outside the door, unnoticed. The door closes and locks her in. The phone rings and Annie screams for Lindsay to answer it while a shape continues to lurk. Annie tries to slip outside the window, but she ends up getting stuck. Lindsay comes outside and hears Annie moan in pain and helps her get out of the window. The phone rings again, and it is Annie's boyfriend Paul, who manages to sneak out and asks her to pick him up. Lindsay resists the idea of leaving to pick Paul up, so Annie decides to take her across the street to the Doyle's house and asks Laurie to watch her. She goes to her car but forgets her keys and goes back in the house to get them. She gets inside the car but realizes there is breath on the windshield, and then the shape pops up from behind the back seat and starts strangling Annie till he slits her throat, killing her. Meanwhile, at the Doyles, Tommy and Lindsay are watching Forbidden Planet, with Tommy getting up, trying to play a little game, scaring Lindsay from behind the window curtain. He sees outside the shape carrying someone into the Wallace residence and starts screaming that the boogeyman is outside. Laurie admonishes Tommy for scaring Lindsay and says if he does it again, that she will put him to bed. Tommy is frustrated that nobody believes him, but Lindsay says she does. Meanwhile, Loomis continues to stake out the outside of the Myers house and scares off some kids who attempt to go inside the place. Chief Brackett, causing yet another jump scare, tells Loomis that he thinks he is way off on this. Loomis tells him that Myers was always staring at this particular night in his cell, inhumanly patient. Laurie's other friend Linda and her boyfriend Bob show up at the Wallaces and walk inside the house to find no one there. They both decide to make out on the sofa, and the scene pans out with a shape watching them from right outside the living room in the house. They call Laurie and find out Annie went to pick up Paul and Lindsay is over at the Doyles for the night, so they decide to go upstairs and take their play to the next level. As Linda and Bob are making love, a shape of a shadow is moving across the bed, increasing our tension with each passing second. Linda asks Bob to go downstairs and get her a beer. He goes down to the kitchen, but hears someone moving in the closet. Bob opens up the closet and a shape springs forth, pinning him to the wall, raising him up, and impaling him with the butcher's knife. The shape silently steers as Bob's body becomes lifeless. As Linda is laying in bed, someone opens the door pretending to be a ghost but wearing glasses. That is clearly Bob, isn't it? Linda talks and shows him her goods, but the ghost figure remains silent and motionless. Linda, creeped out, calls Laurie, but the ghost figure advances on her and strangles her with the telephone wire, while Laurie is connected on the other end. Laurie, thinking it is Annie pulling a joke, gets pissed and is immediately disconnected. She tries to call again, but gets no answer, and then she sees the lights go out from the Wallace house. The shape awaits Laurie in darkness. Loomis, still staked out at the Myers house, spots the government car that Myers stole at the beginning and immediately begins patrolling the neighborhood, looking for any sign of trouble or Myers himself. Lori puts the children to bed and, still not having heard from her friends for a while, decides to leave the house and walk to the Wallace residence. She goes through the back door to a silent, dark, and apparently empty house. She slowly makes her way through the house, screaming that it is not funny and that they will be sorry. She goes up the stairs and sees a door slightly ajar with a glow seeping out. She walks into the room to see Annie laid out on the bed, dead, with Judith Myers' headstone above her. The body of Bob swings from the closet door, and Linda's body is stuffed in the other closet. Lori screams and retreats out of the room in horror and starts crying near a dark doorway. The shape emerges out of the darkness behind Lori and slashes her in the right arm, causing her to fall over the banister and land on the stairs. The shape makes its way down the stairs as Lori is scrambling to get the hell out of the house by breaking the glass of the back door she entered in. Outside, she screams for help, begging the neighbors to help her, but they ignore her. She hobbles back to the Doyle house and screams for Tommy to let her in since she lost the keys during the attack. The shape is slowly advancing on Lori from across the street, but Tommy lets her in just in time. She tells Tommy to lock the door to his bedroom and shut out the lights. Lori realizes she left the front room window open and crouches down as the shape emerges from behind the sofa and attempts to stab her but misses, and Lori stabs him in the neck with a knitting needle, killing him dead on the floor. Loomis, in the meantime, is still patrolling the streets for any sign of Myers or any trouble and tells Brackett in his car that he found the car and confirms Myers is here. If he spotted the car and Myers is parked outside the Wallaces, how did he not see the whole thing with Lori screaming and Myers walking across the street? My only gripe with this film. Lori hobbles upstairs to let the children know that she was able to dispatch the boogeyman, but Tommy tells her that you can't kill the boogeyman, so the shape, somehow revived, is right behind her. The kids lock the door and Lori hides in the bedroom closet. The shape attempts to break his way into the closet and accidentally turns on the closet light, with us seeing his mask. Lori takes a hanger and stabs the shape in the eye with it, dropping his knife. Lori performs the coup de grace and stabs it in the chest and falls with a thud, killing it again. Lori talks to the kids and tells them to go to the neighbors and have them call the police and to have them send them over there. As the kids are running out screaming, Loomis is walking by and notices something is wrong. Lori gets up, not realizing that the shape has also gone up robotically and is silently advancing on her again, this time attempting to strangle her. She manages to rip the mask off of the shape, revealing a 21-year-old Michael Myers, just as Loomis gets up the stairs and sees him, confirming his patient. The shape puts his mask back on as he gets shot by Loomis, knocked into the bedroom. Loomis advances, and the shape just standing there in the darkness. Therefore, Loomis unloads his .357 onto the shape, knocking it off the balcony ledge, landing in the yard, dead. Lori asks Loomis if that was indeed the boogeyman, with Loomis responding in a chilling manner that it was, in fact, the boogeyman. Loomis walks to the ledge to see that the shape has vanished and is still at large. You can hear heavy breathing in the various locations of this film, implying that the shape could be anywhere. That concludes John Carpenter's Halloween. As far as Carpenter was concerned, there was no story left to tell, only for the studio to disagree and greenlight a sequel with or without him. Carpenter agreed to come back to write the film, pulling late nights being miserable writing the sequel over several beers, unsure of where to take the story. Rick Rosenthal would come to direct, and hence after several beers and studio pressure to make the film more gratuitous to compete with the likes of Friday the 13th series and other copycat slashers of 1981, the poetically decent but inferior sequel, Halloween 2 came back to terrorize moviegoers and conclude the night he came home, and resolves the story of Laurie Strode, Dr. Loomis, and the Shape itself, Michael Myers. Halloween 2 begins where the first film left off, re-showing the Shape's final attack on Laurie, and Dr. Loomis saving her and shooting the silent killer out of the window. Loomis finds the Shape gone and runs outside to find out where it went. A neighbor with a max cringe stat complains about being trick-or-treated to death. Loomis has a great comeback.
You don't know what death is.
Hence the movie truly begins with a similar opening title card and credits. The Shape, having fled Dr. Loomis, is hiding in an alley. He stealthily walks into an old lady's house and takes her butcher knife and leaves behind a trail of blood, terrifying the old lady. A young neighbor walks out of her house and tries to find out if the old lady is alright, with the Shape locked onto her as prey. The girl finds out about the murders in the previous film, and the Shape walks into her living room without closing the door. The girl goes and investigates the living room, but the Shape springs up and kills her with the old lady's knife, in an unnecessary scene other than to raise the film's body count. We go back to Laurie, who is wheeled out of the Doyle house and taken to the ambulance by paramedics, and departs to and then arrives at Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. As the paramedics are taking Laurie to the ER, we see a mother helping her son to the ER who has a razor blade caught in the roof of his mouth, in an upsetting and unnecessary segment that does nothing to add to the film, in an attempt to caution younger viewers when taking candy from strangers. Back to Laurie. We meet Dr. Mixter and the staff at the hospital, along with Bud and Jimmy, the two paramedics that took her to the hospital. Laurie is convinced Michael is still after her and refuses an anesthetic, but it goes unheard. Loomis and Sheriff Brackett are still patrolling the neighborhood, trying to find the Shape, still at large. They spot a man with a similar outfit and mask that fits the Shape's description, and Loomis, thinking it's the killer itself, tries to shoot, but another police car, completely out of left field, runs the man into a van, causing a baffling explosion that makes virtually no sense. A very stupid scene indeed, but it ends on a tragic note. Sheriff Brackett gets word from his deputy about Annie being one of the Shape's victims in the Wallace house. They arrive and we see them carry out the three teenagers and Annie, with a grieving Brackett blaming Loomis for the whole thing, and thus exits Sheriff Brackett from the story. Will we ever see this character again? As a matter of fact, we will. With Laurie's case being all over the news on TV and the radio, the Shape, overhearing a kid's boombox, makes his way to Haddonfield Hospital where he can finish the job and resume his killing spree. The phone lines at the hospital are down for no reason, so Mr. Garrett, the security man at the hospital, goes out to investigate with a couple of jump scares for good measure, and ends up in the supply room. The Shape appears behind him and hits him in the head with the claw end of a hammer, killing him. Loomis, the deputy, and a dentist review the corpse of the guy that was caught in the hit and explosion. Dennis determines the remains belong to a teenager and therefore assume the Shape is still out there. They go over to the Myers house where they find an angry mob throwing stones at the house. Two teenagers go up to the deputy and say that their friend Ben Tramer is missing and was drunk. Ben Tramer is the guy that Laurie tells Annie who she's attracted to in the previous film. Well, so much for that potential relationship. Laurie has a dream that as a young girl her mother tells her that she is not her actual mother, and she goes and visits a boy sitting in a chair staring at a window but turns around and looks at her. Bud, the paramedic, and Karen, the nurse that was late for work, decides to screw around and go to the therapy pool, which can act like a jacuzzi with the temperature adjusted. The pool goes up in the temperature for some reason, sending Bud to investigate in the other room. From far away, the viewer sees a Shape appear and strangles Bud in the other room, and then walks into the room pretending to be Bud, stroking Karen until she looks up and sees the Shape as he starts dunking her head in the water multiple times, burning her face and drowning her at the same time. A very poetic kill indeed. Meanwhile, Loomis and the deputy head to an elementary school that was recently broken into, and we see the words SAMHAIN written on the chalkboard in blood, and a knife protruding from a crayon drawing that says Sister. SAMHAIN is the Celtic Lord of the Dead, the end of summer, the festival. A government car parks and we see Nurse Chambers from the previous movie appear. She tells Loomis that he is ordered back to Smith's Grove by order of the governor of Illinois, with a marshal waiting for him outside to escort him back. Smith's Grove wants to cover this incident up as much as possible, it seems. At the hospital, as the Shape is stalking it, Jimmy finds Lori in a catatonic state. Gets Nurse Jill, and they believe Lori is having an adverse reaction to the medication they gave her for her injuries. They send Janet to find Dr. Mixter, where she goes into his office, only to find him dead with a syringe protruding from his eyeball. Janet, horrified, backs away, just as the Shape emerges from the darkness behind her and sticks a syringe into her temple, killing her in another poetic way. With more and more people being killed, Nurse Jill and Jimmy are the only ones left and leave Lori to look for everyone else. The Shape uses this as an opportunity to kill Lori in her sleep and enters her room and begins to repeatedly stab at her with a scalpel, only to find the bed empty. Lori got up and is hobbling around the hospital corridor, staying a step ahead of the Shape. She hides in a corner in another room and attempts to call someone to no avail. Jimmy tells Nurse Jill that if she can't find anyone, that she should make her way to the police station in town. Jimmy goes to the OR and finds the nursing supervisor, Elvis, strapped to a table with her body being emptied of its blood all over the floor. Jimmy reacts and slips on the blood, landing on the floor and hitting his head, rendering him unconscious. Nurse Jill attempts to leave the hospital, but all the cars in the parking lot have their tires slashed, so she ends up going back in to find Lori hobbling around. She calls out to Lori, but is stabbed in the back by the Shape and is raised off the ground, with the shoes falling off her feet in another poetic moment. Lori sees this and flees to the basement with the Shape in pursuit. She finds Mr. Garrett hanging out in the supply room and attempts to climb into a small access window into the adjacent room as the Shape is trying to continually slash at her. She lands in the other room and makes her way to the service elevator. Being a horror movie, the elevator takes its time, with the Shape approaching and opens and takes time closing, closely enough that the Shape's hand with the scalpel gets caught in the elevator door. Narrowly escaping, Lori goes outside and hides inside one of the parked cars. In the meantime, inside the government vehicle heading back to Smith's Grove, Nurse Chambers reveals to Dr. Loomis a hidden file that was sealed by the governor, revealing that Laurie Strode is the biological sister of Michael and Judith Myers. The Strodes adopted her after the Myers parents were killed 2 years after Michael was committed. Loomis realizes that the Shape killed one sister already and is trying to kill the other, and learns Lori is at the hospital and orders the marshal to turn the car around at gunpoint and fires a warning shot, turning the car around indeed. Lori is still hiding in the car, sees a figure approaching and enters the car. It is Jimmy, and he attempts to start the car to no avail, like any good horror movie should. He passes out from his head injury, and his head falls on the car horn, setting it off. Lori pulls him off and attempts to get out of the car, but she can barely walk and is on the ground. Loomis, Chambers, and the marshal arrive, but somehow don't see her crawling and enter the hospital. She screams, but the Shape appears in the parking lot and pursues Lori. With all her strength, she hobbles to the hospital entrance, but it is locked, in another poetic moment of her screaming for someone to let her in. Loomis gets her in time, but the Shape walks through the glass door and continues his pursuit. Loomis unloads his .357 Magnum on the Shape, causing him to fall to the floor. Loomis sends Chambers outside to the police car to call for backup. The marshal, thinking he is dead, goes up to it, but the Shape springs up and slits the throat of the marshal. The Shape rises and pursues Loomis and Laurie into a room filled with several gas tanks. Loomis gives Laurie the marshal's gun while the Shape slashes his way into the room. Loomis attempts to shoot him, but is out of bullets and gets stabbed in the gut as a result. The Shape slowly approaches Laurie, but Laurie manages to shoot him in the eyes, blinding him. Loomis and Laurie systematically open the valves of the gas canisters in the room, with the Shape blindly slashing at the direction of the gas. Loomis orders Laurie to flee and gives her enough time before Loomis takes out a lighter and says, "It's time, Michael," and lights it, blowing up the surgery room with Laurie barely clear of it. The Shape emerges from the room, on fire, but collapses, burnt to a crisp with its mask. Daybreak arrives and Laurie is taken to another hospital via ambulance, dwelling on the burning mask and body of the Shape as she is driven off to safety. That, my friends, concludes the night he came home. That first movie is one of my personal favorites of all time, and one that is nostalgic for me. I found the VHS stored away in one of my dad's bins in the basement when I was in 6th grade, but was too afraid to watch it due to the box art. However, when I was at Suncoast Video, looking at the Star Trek shelf, I saw the movie's trailer on the TV and got interested. Thus, I finally watched the movie, and the tension in that original film never disappoints. These two movies were successful that the studio wanted more movies, and thus a horror franchise was born. It starts with Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, an anthological movie where the original Halloween is a movie within that movie and evil to watch. The Shape himself, Michael Myers, and Dr. Loomis, despite being immolated in Halloween 2, were both revived for Halloweens 4, 5, and 6, continuing the story, but this time with Laurie being deceased and introducing her daughter, Jamie Lloyd. Donald Pleasance's final movie was Halloween 6, and he passed away before the film was released. An alternate timeline was created for the movie Halloween H2O to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the original film, where Laurie was alive but in hiding under an assumed name with a teenage son. That continues into Halloween Resurrection and ends another timeline in shambles. Rob Zombie remakes the original and its sequel, but gives a lot more backstory to Michael Myers, making him less scary and more sympathetic, which I refuse to see to this very day. A decade later has passed and the Halloween series is reset once again, with Jamie Lee Curtis coming back again as Laurie Strode for a 40th anniversary, only this time as a flawed person with issues after experiencing a horrific event. This 2018 film is a direct sequel to the original, and none of the other films, including Halloween 2, ever happens. The Shape is taken into custody right after Loomis shoots him in the Doyle house and is back in the sanitarium. This movie is a love letter to the original and is the best sequel tied with the original Halloween 2, in my opinion. This 2018 movie is something I recommend you go see, and that will be followed up by the upcoming film Halloween Kills, and ultimately concluded in Halloween Ends. I can't wait to see these movies, and I ask that you stay vigilant this Halloween season and make sure to lock your doors, bolt your windows, and turn out the lights, because the boogeyman is coming, and the Shape could appear anywhere, everywhere. On the next episode of Serial Horror Sessions, we find ourselves in San Francisco, and a new piece of flora has appeared from outer space. Shortly thereafter, the people are wrong. Lack of emotions, lack of awareness, lack of recognizing family. It is almost as if they are different people, perhaps, replaced by others, far more sinister and without compassion, tenderness, love. Join me next time as we experience the invasion of the body snatchers from 1978. Make sure you are still subbed and hit the bell for notifications to experience the next Serial Horror Sessions. Do not let fellow Nerdporials get replaced by Podporials, and hit that like button, and we will see you next time.